Hello everyone, you are listening to Uncomfortable Truths with Euclid Phoenix, where I talk about politics, religion, and other BS that I find interesting. Today, for religion, we will take a look at a couple of arguments people use to prove that there is a God. The cosmological argument for God, one of philosophy's greatest debates. Few arguments for the existence of God have had more influence than the cosmological argument. Versions of it stretch back to ancient Greece philosophy, medieval Islamic thinkers, Christian theologians like Thomas Aquinas, and continue into modern philosophy today. At its core, the cosmological argument asks a deceptively simple question. Why does anything exist at all? Why is there a universe instead of nothing? Why are there causes, laws, matter, energy, and existence itself? Supporters of the argument... Hang on, I got to pop up. Supporters of the argument believe the existence of the universe points towards some kind of ultimate cause or necessary being, often identified as God. Critics argue the argument contains logical problems, unsupported assumptions, and possibly special pleading. In this episode, we'll explore what the cosmological argument actually says, its strengths, its weaknesses, and the problems found in both the arguments and the objections. Because this debate is much deeper than God exists versus God doesn't exist, it ultimately touches on causality, existence, infinity, science, and limits of human understanding itself. What is the cosmological argument? The cosmological argument comes in several forms, but the general idea is this. Things exist. Existing things appear to depend on causes or explanations. An infinite chain of dependent causes may be impossible or insufficient. Therefore, there must be some ultimate independent cause or necessary reality. That final reality is often called God, the first cause, the necessary being, or the uncaused cause. One famous version comes from Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas argued that everything in motion is moved by something else, but if every cause depended on another cause forever, we would never ultimately explain why anything exists. So Aquinas concluded there must be a first unmoved mover. The strengths of the cosmological argument. It appeals to common human intuition. One reason the argument has endured for centuries is because it feels intuitively reasonable. In ordinary life, things have causes, events have explanations, effects follow from prior conditions. If you hear a noise in your house, you naturally ask, what caused that? The cosmological argument extends this instinct to existence itself. Why should the universe be exempt from explanation? This makes the argument psychologically powerful. It addresses why there is something rather than nothing. Science can often explain how stars form, how evolution works, how gravity behaves, but the cosmological argument pushes deeper. Why does reality exist at all? Even some non-religious philosophers admit this question is philosophically difficult. The argument attempts to provide an ultimate explanation instead of stopping at the universe just exists. It fits certain scientific ideas. Some versions of the cosmological argument gained renewed attention because modern cosmology suggests the observable universe had a beginning. The Big Bang model indicates space, time, matter, and energy emerged from an earlier state. Supporters argue if the universe began to exist, it may require a cause beyond itself. This became especially important in modern versions like the Calum Cosmological Argument. It attempts to avoid infinite regress. Another strength is its challenge to infinite regress. If every explanation requires another explanation forever, do we ever truly explain anything? The cosmological argument claims that reality ultimately requires something self-existent, necessary, or foundational. Otherwise, explanation never reaches completion. The weakness and criticisms. Who created God? This is probably the most famous objection. Critics ask if everything needs a cause, then wouldn't God also need a cause? Otherwise, the argument seems inconsistent. Supporters respond, the argument never claimed everything requires a cause. Instead, they argue contingent things require causes, but a necessary being does not. Critics often view this as special pleading, creating an exception simply to preserve the argument. The universe may not need a cause. Some philosophers and physicians argue that the universe itself may sharply be a brute fact. In other words, existence may not require further explanation. The cosmological argument assumes reality must ultimately be explained. Critics challenge that assumption itself. Maybe the universe simply exists. Quantum physics complicates causality. In classical physics, causality appears straightforward, but quantum mechanics complicates the picture. Some quantum events appear probabilistic or spontaneous. This raises difficult questions. Does everything truly require a deterministic cause? Are classical intuitions about causality universally reliable? Supporters often counter that quantum events still occur within underlying physical systems and laws, but the debate becomes much less clear-cut. Even if there is a first cause, why call it God? This is another major criticism. Even if the argument succeeds in establishing a first cause, necessary reality, or foundational existence, it does not automatically prove Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or any personal deity. The first cause could theoretically be impersonal, abstract, unknown, or radically unlike traditional religion. So critics argue the argument may, at best, establish some kind of metaphysical foundation, not necessarily God as commonly understood. Problems with the criticisms. Now here's where the debate becomes especially interesting. The objections themselves also face problems. The universe just exists may not actually explain anything. Critics sometimes accuse theists of special pleading, but simply saying the universe is just there may not solve the explanatory problem either. It can feel less like explanation and more like stopping the inquiry. In some ways, both sides eventually reach foundational assumptions. Infinite regress remains philosophically difficult. Even critics of the cosmological argument often struggle with infinite regress. Can an actual infinite chain of dependent causes truly exist? Philosophers remain divided. Some think infinite regress is logically coherent. Others believe explanation must eventually terminate in something fundamental. There is no universal consensus. Science may not fully answer metaphysical questions. Science is incredibly powerful at describing mechanisms, processes, physical interactions, but philosophical questions like why is there existence at all may go beyond empirical science itself. This does not prove God, but it means purely scientific explanations may not fully eliminate metaphysical questions either. The deeper issue, human cognitive limits. One of the most fascinating aspects of this debate is that it may expose the limits of human reasoning itself. Humans evolved to understand medium-sized objects, survival, physical interactions, everyday causality, but ultimate reality may not fit comfortably inside ordinary intuition. Questions like, why does existence exist? Can something come from nothing? Can infinity exist physically? What caused time itself? And you may push human cognition close to its limits. And this is why debates about cosmological argument often continue for centuries without resolution. My perspective. One of the reasons the cosmological argument remains so compelling is because it teaches something deeply existential. Many people feel existence itself cries out for explanation. At the same time, the argument does not fully escape difficult questions of its own. Personally, I think both sides sometimes oversimplify the issue. Some theists present the argument as though it conclusively proves a specific religious worldview. Some atheists dismiss it too quickly as though the existence of reality itself is not philosophically mysterious. But existence is mysterious. Whether one ultimately believes in God, an eternal universe, a multiverse, a brute existence, or something else entirely, the deeper philosophical questions remain remarkably difficult. Conclusion. The cosmological argument remains one of philosophy's greatest debates because it asks one of humanity's oldest questions: why is there something instead of nothing? Its strengths include intuitive appeal, explanatory ambition, philosophical depth. Its weaknesses include questions about causality, special pleading concerns, uncertainty about what a first cause actually means, and even the criticisms often inherit their own philosophical problems. In the end, the cosmological argument may reveal less about certainty and more about how mysterious existence itself truly is. And for the next argument, we got the fine-tuning argument. Evidence for God or a cosmic coincidence? Modern physics has revealed something deeply strange about the universe. The laws of nature appear balanced on a razor's edge. If certain physical constants were even slightly different, stars might never form, chemistry might collapse, matter could become unstable, or life itself might be impossible. This has led some philosophers, theologians, and scientists to argue that the universe appears fine-tuned for life. And from this observation comes one of the most discussed modern arguments for God, the fine-tuning argument. Supporters believe the precision of the universe points toward intelligence or design. Critics argue the argument misunderstands probability, relies on human-centered thinking, or ignores alternative explanations like the multiverse. In this episode, we'll explore what the fine-tuning argument actually says, its strengths, its weaknesses, and the problem found in both the argument and the objection. Because this debate sits at the crossroads of physics, philosophy, cosmology, probability, and the ancient human question of whether the universe has a purpose. What is the fine-tuning argument? The fine-tuning argument begins with an observation. The universe appears governed by physical constants and laws that fall within extremely narrow ranges necessary for complex life. These include things like gravity, the strength of electromagnetism, the cosmological constant, nuclear forces, and the ratio of matter to energy. According to proponents, if these values changed even slightly, galaxies might never form, atoms could become impossible, stars could burn too quickly, or the universe might collapse immediately after the Big Bang. The argument generally goes something like this. The universe appears finely tuned for life. Fine-tuning is unlikely to occur by pure chance. Therefore, intelligent design is the best explanation. Supporters often compare it to discovering a machine with extraordinary precision or a safe with thousands of dials all perfectly aligned. The intuition is precise order usually points toward intentionality. The strengths of the fine-tuning argument. It draws from modern physics. One reason the fine-tuning argument became so influential is because it is tied to modern cosmology rather than ancient mythology. It arises from actual scientific discoveries about physical constants, cosmic expansion, and the structure of matter. This gives the argument a certain intellectual seriousness. It is not merely look at the trees, therefore God. It engages directly with physics itself. The precision really is remarkable. Even many skeptics admit the universe appears astonishingly balanced. For example, if gravity were significantly stronger or weaker, if the cosmological constant differed slightly, if nuclear forces shifted, the universe might become hostile to complexity in life. This creates a genuine philosophical puzzle. Why should reality permit stars, chemistry, planets, and conscious observers at all? It feels intuitively purposeful. The argument resonates emotionally and psychologically because humans naturally associate intricate order with intelligence. When we encounter computer code, architecture, machinery, or language, we normally infer minds behind them. The fine-tuning argument extends that intuition to the cosmic world. It avoids some problems of older design arguments. Older teleological arguments often focused on biology. The I is complex, therefore God. But evolution challenged many of those claims. Fine-tuning shifted the discussion deeper to physics itself. Even if evolution explains life's development, proponents argue the universe is still needed the right conditions for life to evolve in the first place. The criticisms of the fine-tuning argument. The anthropic principle. One major criticism is called the anthropic principle. This idea says we observe a life-permitting universe because only such a universe could contain observers. In other words, if the universe were incompatible with life, we would not be here to notice it. Critics argue this weakness the sense of surprise behind fine-tuning. The multiverse hypothesis. Another major response is the multiverse. Some physicists speculate there may be countless universes, each with different physical constraints. If enough universes exist, eventually one would not naturally support life. The life tuning would then become less improbable. Supporters of fine-tuning often respond that the multiverse itself is speculative, difficult to test, and may simply move the problem back another level. After all, why would a multiverse generating system exist at all? We don't know the probability distribution. Another criticism is that humans may not actually know how probable these constraints are. We only observe one universe. We do not know whether constants could truly vary freely, whether deeper physical laws determine them, or whether alternative forms of life might exist under different conditions. Critics argue fine-tuning calculations may overstate the improbability. Fine-tuning does not necessarily prove God. Even if the universe is designed, critics argue, this does not automatically establish a traditional deity. The designer could theoretically be impersonal, unknown, extraterrestrial, simulated reality creators, or something entirely beyond human categories. So critics argue the argument may, at best, support some kind of intellect, not necessarily religion as traditionally understood. Problems with the criticisms. Now here's where things get complicated again. The objections also face serious problems. The multiverse may be unprovable. The multiverse is fascinating, but critics of the fine-tuning sometimes present it too confidently. Currently, we cannot directly observe other universes. Some philosophers argue the multiverse risks becoming scientifically speculative, metaphysically extravagant, or even unfalsifiable. Ironically, critics sometimes accuse theists of evoking invisible realities while also invoking potentially infinite invisible universes. The anthropic principle may explain observation but not existence. The anthropic principle explains why observers find themselves in a life-permitting universe, but some argue it does not fully explain why such a universe exists in the first place. It may remove surprise physiologically without fully resolving the deeper metaphysical question. Brute fact explanations may feel unsatisfying. Some skeptics ultimately conclude the universe just happened to be this way, but supporters argue this feels incomplete. The fine-tuning debate often comes down to a deeper philosophical divide. Should existence ultimately have explanation, or should some facts simply fundamental and unexplainable? The deeper psychological and philosophical issue. One fascinating aspect of the fine-tuning debate is how deeply it connects to human perception of meaning. Humans naturally search for patterns, purpose, explanation, and intentionality. Sometimes this helps us discover truth. Sometimes it can lead to false pattern recognition. The challenge is determining when apparent order generally points toward design, and when humans are projecting meaning onto reality, and this is where the debate moves beyond physics into philosophy and psychology. My perspective. Personally, I think the fine-tuning argument is one of the more intellectually interesting arguments for some kind of deeper reality or intelligence, not because it proves God in a simple way, but because the universe generally does appear astonishingly structured. At the same time, I think both sides sometimes overstate their certainty. Some religion apologists present fine-tuning as though it conclusively proves their specific theology, but the leap from fine-tuning exists to therefore a specific religion is true is much larger than people sometimes admit. On the other hand, some skeptics dismiss the issue too casually, even though modern cosmology really does raise profound questions about why reality appears mathematically ordered and life permitting at all. In many ways, the debate reveals how mysterious existence really is. Conclusion. The fine-tuning argument remains powerful because it asks, why does the universe appear so remarkably compatible with life? Its strengths include grounding in modern physics, intuitive force, explanatory ambition. Its weaknesses include uncertainty about probability, alternative explanations, and the challenge of connecting the fine-tuning directly to God. And even criticisms face problems of their own. Speculative multiverses, brute force facts, and unanswered metaphysical questions. In the end, the fine-tuning debate may tell us less about certainty and more about how extraordinary and mysterious the universe truly is. If you enjoyed this episode, consider following the podcast and sharing it with others interested in philosophy, science, cosmology, theology, metaphysics, and astronomy. And remember, the deeper science explores reality, the more reality sometimes begins to resemble philosophy. Check out my website and my Patreon page in the notes. Thank you very much for listening.